The new epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic in the United States lurks within a single congressional district in New York City. This district, spanning Queens and the Bronx, was until recently home to an Uber driver named Anil Sabha and a hospital manager named Priscilla Caro. I say until recently because this plague killed them both. Anil died at Elmhurst Hospital, which is where Priscilla worked as a manager and was exposed by a patient. It's probably no coincidence that this very congressional district, the heart of this crisis, has achieved that status because of pre-existing structural conditions that made it especially vulnerable to this virus. And it's no coincidence that that district in 2018 elected a firebrand of a representative to its U.S. House seat. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a hero and a lightning rod of the progressive movement, was a key surrogate for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, and in what may be her biggest accomplishment to date is seat at the table's very first guest. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
Of course, thank you for having me.
So I want to begin by asking you something I probably wouldn't ask you in normal times. I would just skip over. We've seen you doing live streams and delivering groceries to folks and making statements and making proposals. I actually wonder how you're holding up personally through this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. It's been tough. It is a huge emotional toll. That emotional toll is nowhere near what a lot of our frontline workers are experiencing, but as a leader in this community, as a public servant to this community, it's very difficult. I frequently and routinely have to call family members, congregations, and people in our community offering condolences day in and day out. I have to talk to teenage kids who have lost their parents. I have to talk to spouses that have lost their husband or wife of several decades. I have to talk to people who say, where am I going to get my next meal? Or am I going to be evicted from my apartment next month? And it is extremely difficult to have those conversations and feel like we don't have the federal leadership that's required to give them a good answer.
You're clearly someone with a well-formed worldview. No one has called you wishy-washy. You have a way of looking at these issues. I wonder if this pandemic has actually made you see or think or believe anything that you didn't see or think or believe before.
Yeah, I think this pandemic has done that for a lot of people. I think if anything, what it has done for me is just add clarity and add a finer and sharper point to a lot of what we've already been advocating for. In any other circumstance, I would have been a frontline worker had things not worked out the same, had my primary not turned out the same way 2 years ago. And I know what it's like to not have insurance. I know what it's like to get on public transit and be scared, even if it's not necessarily about acquiring a disease, but scared of being mugged or scared of getting on at 3 o'clock in the morning, scared of not having health insurance. And so I don't think it's necessarily changed any of my underlying beliefs, but it's made them more urgent, I think.
I want to ask you a little bit about your education as a member of Congress. I sometimes think about in my work, a lot of people I write about, to get things done, there's often an inside game and an outside game. And in your line of work, the outside game is some of the stuff you have done so effectively. Drive conversation, command attention for a set of issues you want to talk about, make people focus on your thing instead of the other thing. I wonder what your education has been like on that second front that we see less, about how you get things done by playing the inside game.
There's a tactic that organizers use called power mapping. And you essentially start mapping out relationships and nodes of power, almost like this web or this network in your mind, or you do it, some people do it physically on paper. And that's a lot of the work the inside work that I think I tried to do, is figure out like the power map, figure out unusual alliances, try to find areas of vulnerability that can be leveraged to create pressure on leadership, and pairing that. But also, part of that inside game has also been supporting primary challengers, because ultimately, if the board is stacked for the rich and the powerful, even within the Democratic Party, which it is, the board is stacked for corporations in the Democratic Party, and for the very wealthy. And again, I'm going to be kind of like, people are going to be upset at me for saying that, but it's true. So long as the wealthy control most of political donations to either party, they're the ones who are listened to. So long as the board is stacked that way, sometimes the only choice that you have in certain situations is to change the pieces on the board.
We can enact change in this country, but it takes all of us, and we all have to mobilize. And beyond just organizing for this election, I want all of us to think about how we want to make this part of our lives.
Watching you in some of your last appearances campaigning for Bernie, you had a stump before, but in some of the last ones, you seem to be delivering to close AOC watchers, I consider myself one of them, a message to the movement about what it means to be uncompromising about some of these values, but also be more open-armed, give more of a ramp to people who are not fully down with the program but might be pulled in. Can you talk about that need? That's something, that you've been attacked when you post so much as a video of Elizabeth Warren dancing. Is there an issue of this movement not having enough of a ramp for other folks?
I think what's really important is that, again, it's not about giving up your principles, and it's not about changing your positions, but it is about opening up your posture. Because if we're just about finger wagging and nagging and shaming people into positions, and sometimes that needs to be done in our politics. Sometimes a lot of times, politicians and pundits deserve to be shamed. But it's not the only thing that we can do, and it's not the only tool that we have. And sometimes the most persuasive way that I find to bringing people into the fold is what my mentor called the golden gate of retreat, is that you create a path for someone that perhaps it started out a conversation disagreeing with you. If you can create a path for them to find common ground with you, for them to land in your conclusion without necessarily conceding that they were wrong, but perhaps coming to the same conclusion in a different way, you can create consensus.
It's fascinating. So I want to, after we come back from a short break, talk to you about Joe Biden. We'll be back in a minute.